Ta-da!
Okay, now what am I doing? Am I looking into the lens?
You are, yes.
Okay, hello lens.
So, Mike, thanks for being with us today. Again, we have a bunch of journalists that are participating with us that couldn't travel with us here today. But they've submitted questions, and we can just get right to it.
Cool.
First and foremost, Ray from
They can all hear me. They can all see me.
We can all hear you, yep.
Dear God, this is magic. Hello, everybody. Where are they?
Most of them are back in Los Angeles. We have a couple in New York and some others that are scattered about the country. But the first question is from Ray at thecartel.com, which asks, how were Jake and Gemma cast? Was it important in the decision for them to become, figure faces for the film?
What faces?
Figure faces, or kind of your leads. How were they cast?
Forgive me, I don't understand figure faces, but perhaps it doesn't matter. They were cast because, to start with Jake, when I read the script, knowing that I was going to go and talk to Disney about the whole way that I wanted to make the movie, and Jerry needed to know as well, I knew that I should have somebody in my head. I wanted to get that issue out of my head very early on. And so I started to think around young actors that I knew, and I kept coming back to Jake. I'd seen lots of his movies. I'd actually known him when he was a kid. He simply kept coming back. And what it was about him was that I knew that he would be a rebel, and I needed a rebel. I needed a kid who'd come off the streets and who had been taken into a royal family, but wasn't blood royal, and would be, simply a rebel. I thought that he had a wonderful comic sense. I loved the notion of him playing comedy, and of course he's very handsome, and his acting is beyond doubt. What I didn't know was whether he could become an action hero. But he took that on in spades. He really, really took that on, and he made himself into an action hero, and he made himself have an English accent, and the work that he did was phenomenal. With Gemma, it was a much longer process and a more conventional process in a way. And so I went to Jerry with Jake, and he said, who do you think it is? And I said, I think it's Jake. They met, and it was okay. With Gemma, it was a more conventional process, and I looked at lots and lots of people. I looked at Iranian actresses, I looked at Israeli and Egyptian actresses, obviously British and American, but I was on my way to Bollywood because I wanted a particular luscious, exotic look to this girl, so that the two cultures, the Persians on the one hand and the Alamutians on the other, would be physically very, very different. Wonderful looking girls in Bollywood, and terrific actresses too. But then in walked Gemma, and the great thing about Gemma was that she was so young. And I'd wanted to go right down to 16. If I could have found a 16-year-old, I would have. So that I would find somebody who was kind of innocent and untested, and for whom the events of the story would be a huge challenge. And Gemma was, when I met her, was only 21 and just fresh out of drama school, and so she was very interesting to me for that reason. And then I discovered, as I auditioned her more and more and more, that she was a fabulous actress and looked pretty much exactly like what I wanted the girl to look like. And then Jerry saw her, and everybody got comfortable, and away we went.
As a follow-up to that, Jake and Gemma...
It's a very odd process. I don't know whether you're aware of that. This is an extremely odd process. I can see lots and lots of technicians in peripheral vision. I can see a man who's asking me questions in peripheral vision, and you, to whom I am talking as if you are my brothers, I cannot see at all. God, it's weird.
Well, the technician over here asks if Jake and Gemma's characters have really great snappy chemistry in the tradition of really great adversarial romantic pairings in film. When did you realize that they had such great chemistry together?
I think when we actually started to do it, because of course in rehearsal we did some pretty serious rehearsal. We did a couple of weeks of hard rehearsal, but everybody's still pulling their punches. Everybody's not completely committed. And then you get on and you actually start to do it, and they still hold back, and finally you say, oh, come on, cut loose for God's sake. And then they do, and they start to kind of grate on one another, like sandpaper on iron. And then it gets interesting. And that happened only when they were actually in front of the camera.
James from MSN Movies asks, he's curious if there are any classic adventure films that you looked at to get a sense of the tone and tenor that you wanted to achieve with this film.
Well, I looked at everything you would expect me to look at. I looked at The Thief of Baghdad. I looked at it's the end of a long day here, and I'm afraid my synapses just snap. Who is the Spielberg archaeologist with the slouch hat? It's Harrison Ford. And I looked at all of those movies, and they were very important. David Lean was very important. I longed to do the charge on Aqaba from Lawrence, but all those great big movies of the 50s and further back as well. They were all very important to me. But I also reckoned that if what I could do was to make this great big booming 5-ring circus of a movie that had got so much in it, also have an anchor of very intimate, frank, tender, one-on-one scenes where people were telling one another the emotional truth, then you would touch the audience in their hearts in a way that simply big battle scenes were never quite going to. You had to have the intimate with the colossal.
Jamie from MovieWeb.com asks, can you talk about working with Jerry Bruckheimer and what he brought to the production as a producer and how it contributed to your overall process?
Yeah, sure. I had reckoned right from the beginning that what I was doing was to make a film in a very particular genre. And for me, it was like making a Western with John Ford sitting over there. Because this was a Jerry Bruckheimer movie, which, as we all know, is a kind of genre. They just aren't like any other films. They are very particular. But there is Jerry sitting across the corridor in his office. Please don't stand there. Thank you. So there I was with the man himself. Now, when we shot it, cast it, did all of the preparation work, he was very, very hands-off. I didn't see him more than half a dozen times while we shot. And then we moved into post-production, and I showed him the first cut, and then he began. And Jerry's a very generous guy, and he's a very unegotistical guy, and at the same time, he's like a little, well, he's not a little, he's like a terrier. And he sinks his teeth into your leg, and he does not let go. And I remember howling at him once, "For God's sake, Jerry, it's a gorgeous shot. Why do you want me to chuck it out or cut it in half or whatever it is?" And he said, "Don't you ever forget that if I could, I'd have this movie play at 4.5 minutes long." And he would too. He's got ADD. What he knows is he knows the audience, and he knows that the audience has got ADD as well. Actually, I might ungenerously point out they've partly got ADD because he's introduced them to the complaint, but there we are. And so he and I had a marvelous kind of sprightly, uncruel, unnasty, adversarial relationship when we got into the cutting room. And then I said to myself, you know, if this thing is going to be any good, and for Christ's sake you are working with the most successful producer in the Western world, then this guy, Jerry, has got to sell $200 million worth of tickets before this thing shows 1 cent in the black. And so really it should be part of what you, the director, do, not to impose your daft little, "but the shot's so beautiful," kind of demands. You should be listening to what it takes to make $1 at the box office. And I think we then began to understand, certainly I began to understand him better. And it was kind of fun. I mean, you know, it is like dealing with John Ford. People will say, you know, down the line, they'll say, my God, you worked with that guy. And I'm glad to have done it. He's instructive, and I've learned all sorts of lessons that I will never forget.
Well, thank you. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today, but we appreciate it. And everybody back home will be back with Jerry in just a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Sorry, guys.